really want to draw our attention to this. As we work through the story, we begin to see that God is working his upper story throughout the entire scenario. And here's the key defining part, is that God needed to do something to get their attention big time. And that's where the kingdom split in two, and then they had to go into an exile. And that's where we find ourselves in the exile. But here we are at the return. We're kind of going into the return. And the whole idea behind the exile, and I believe, was for God to get his people's attention. But here's the thing about us. I don't know about you, but sometimes, and I've explained this to quite a few people, I have a real short memory span. Like I'm talking like sometimes 4 to 5 seconds. You know, some people will tell me something and literally out of my mind that second. And you guys, a lot of you guys know what I'm talking about in this room. You know, you'll say something to me and I'm just like, I'm not even listening. Right? Because my mind isn't silent. I'm thinking about other things. And my wife drew my attention to something as we were listening to what show were we listening to yesterday? Anyways, don't matter. Because News, wasn't it? The words silent and listen use the same letters. And often I'm not silent enough to listen. Right? And I think the Israelites are in the same place. They're not silent enough to listen to God. And I think sometimes we're all in that situation. I've been, on a prayer journey this past week as I've been really diving into my faith. Some things came to me this week and some news came to me this week about just certain things, about certain faith issues with certain people. And I've just been really diving into, why do I have faith in Jesus? And what I began to recognize is that I have to be silent enough or long enough just to listen to what God has to say. And the Israelites, I think, find themselves in this place is they're just not silent enough to listen long enough to God. And even as they're coming out of this time of exile, these 70 years, apart from, and a whole generation of people have been brought up outside of the promised land, and Ezra comes into the scenario, Ezra chapter 10. And while Ezra was praying and confessing, and see, they need to confess because they're still living this lifestyle that really doesn't put God first, and weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelites, men, women, and children gathered around him. They too wept bitterly. Then Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, one of the descendants of Elam, son of Ezra, we have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the peoples around us. But in spite of this, listen to these words. But in spite of whatever goes on in your life, despite of maybe sometimes your lack of faith or doubt, or you just not listening to God long enough, despite of everything that goes on in our life, despite of the exile, despite COVID, but despite all of it, listen to these words. Despite the fact that we've gone off and married and been unfaithful to our God, there is still hope.